Hi there, and welcome back. In this video, I want to cover some SketchUp basics. There are a few things that I tell every new user for SketchUp, and I wanted to put them all in one place, which is what this video is for. So in a minute, we'll cover my 10 most common startup items for getting started with SketchUp. Don't forget to check out my book, Architectural Design with SketchUp. It covers all of these topics and makes for a great desk reference. You can find it where books are sold. There's also a link to it on my site, sketchupfordesign.com, together with lots of additional tutorials and news. Okay, let's get started. Now, what I'm covering here works pretty similarly with the desktop version of SketchUp, whether you've got it running on Windows, which is what I have here, or on a Mac. Mac, of course, looks a slight bit different, but the functionality is pretty much the same. It also works with the web version of SketchUp, as you know. That's at app.sketchup.com. And it, to some extent, also works on the iPad version. Now, obviously, for the iPad version, there's a bit of a different, input type preference, where you, of course, have a stylus, whereas on a computer, you would most probably have a mouse and a keyboard. So there's some differences there, but some of the basics are exactly the same. So yeah, works for all of those, independent of which one you're using, whether you use a free web version or whether you've purchased a license and you're on a subscription. This all works for you. All right, so let's get going. Here's number one. When I open a new installation of SketchUp, it looks like this here, and I usually start customizing things pretty quickly. So, as you all know, up here there's a toolbar. This is actually called the Getting Started toolbar. And that's good to get started. But once you do more with SketchUp, you most probably will want to customize your work environment. There's also the trays, of course, on the right side, which you can customize to some extent. But the first thing I always do is change my toolbars. So you can right-click on a toolbar, this empty space up here, or you can go to View Toolbars. Gets you into the same neighborhood. And then you can pick and choose what you want. And my choice is always the large tool set, because that puts tools to the left of my screen. I get a good amount of real estate in the middle, and at that point I can get rid of the Getting Started toolbar up here. Just click it away. You can also uncheck it. So if you right click on a toolbar, you can always check and uncheck, show and hide basically toolbars. So that's my first one. There are a few other toolbars that I pretty much always have open. So one is the Styles toolbar, and I like putting it up top right here. And then the other one is the Views toolbar, but you can, of course, do whatever works for you. Styles works well because you can quickly switch between textured, untextured, X-ray. Very often you need to kind of look at things that are behind things, so X-ray is really useful. You also have access with the views to the standard views, top, ISO, all of those. So that is a useful thing for me, and I have a bunch of plugins or extensions up here. Their toolbars show up right there, but this is kind of my minimal startup, and you should organize your workspace also just the way you like it. So that's my tip number one. All right, so number two would be units. And the way I like to look at it just really quickly is by drawing a simple, square. And then when you draw something, you start the rectangle tool. At that point, and I'm going to use my mouse to just kind of scooch over here, you see down here on the bottom right, you see temporary dimensions. You'll never have to click that box, the measurements box, but you'll see the temporary dimensions, and this is now when you can enter dimensions. And you can enter dimensions, as you see here, with unit symbols, so as in 10 inches, 10 inches. Oopsie, did not work well. Right there. Or you can simply do 10, 10, because for SketchUp, the default unit is inches, and then you can hit enter, and you've drawn something precisely 10 inches by 10 inches. You can always double check things with the tape measure tool right here. And it's 10 by 10. Good, perfect. So very often when you work with SketchUp, you will want to be precise. So this is my word of warning to always work precisely. You know, you can do, of course, some free modeling in SketchUp. You can do push-pull, you know, you can be creative and all of that. But you got to be careful that you don't model yourself into a corner. Very often when you want to 3D print something later, for example, you do need a pretty clean model to do that. And if you are clean from the very beginning, you're going to actually end up having something that you can use. So keep that in mind. Work with units as much as you can. Those work with, you know, anything, of course. If you do a line, you can type in 24 for 2 feet. If you go over here, now you could actually mix and match units. This is another little tip if you want to, or if you have to. I can type in 1M and I get a line that's exactly 1 meter long, even though, you know, internally SketchUp always uses inches. Once you work with units right here, you can use anything that it understands. All right, so there's my plea for units and precision and how to enter those. All right. Number 3, draw precisely, and that is, of course, part of my second one there too, where, you know, you do want to always be precise. You do want to work with things. A little helper there is the tape measure tool, where you can not just measure a length, but if you go in a certain direction here, and you type in a length, like 3 inches, get yourself a temporary point right there. Or if you take an edge, basically just click on an edge, and you move in a certain direction, you're going to get yourself a parallel line, and this could be at 4 inches now. And now I have these helpers that help me basically draw precisely with our regular tools, you know, and then of course I can push, pull, and all of those kind of things. So pick any of these, you know, either direct distance entry, direct measurement entry, or some of these tape measure tools to give you temporary points. Very useful. You always want to be precise there. Number 4, inferences. SketchUp is great with inferences, and that's of course one of its, you know, things that it's been doing very well from the very beginning, which is the ability of drawing in 3D, you know, very easily and very quickly and very precisely. All right, inferences are, you know, going hand in hand with what we just did with the dimensions, and you will most probably bounce back and forth between those. But by inference, I mean, if I were to, for example, push-pull this guy here, I can now inference something else. I can get the exact height from that element or the scale figure, you know, all of these kind of things. So that works really well. References to endpoints. Obviously, there's O-snaps too, you know, all of that works really well. But the inference system is very useful, and you need to just kind of practice it, and then you can work with it. Now, sometimes, because you're in 3D, you know, you don't really know what is being inferenced. So that's of course where the color toggle comes in, where, you know, once you're parallel to an axis, the inference engine colors what it is you're doing right here. And then sometimes you just need to, you know, grab a reference and work parallel to that, and that's where the shift key comes in. So in other words, once you have some kind of a reference and you hold shift, your mouse can do whatever it wants to. You'll stay on that reference. Once you let go of Shift, you're basically in 3D space again. So that is really useful in combination with everything else to just, keep things straight. The same thing works with some of the tools, like the rotation tool, for example, which needs a plane about which it rotates. As you can see here, it'll guess something, based on where your mouse is. But if you want to rotate something about a certain plane and you want to lock to that plane, independent of what you do, then of course your Shift key is again your friend. All right, so Inferences, very nice. All right, next, selecting things. Classics in SketchUp. There's different ways to select, as with any kind of a CAD or a 3D modeling software. In SketchUp, it works this way. If you single-click something, you select the face or the item, the line. If you double-click something, face and bounding edges. If you triple-click right here, everything that's connected, everything that's glued to whatever you just clicked. So those are kind of the three click selections. Then you have window and crossing selections, which means if I drag from the top left to the bottom right, I will select everything that's within that frame. If I go bottom right to top left, everything that's within, and crossing actually works downward too. Don't have to mirror the thing, but it's basically to the right, window, to the left, crossing. So just keep that in mind. That's another way to select things. And then with that, I find sometimes, just lining up your view is useful. Like if I wanted to select both top plates for these guys here. And then sometimes it's really useful to actually go into parallel projection right here, just so that you can easier select things with a window selection. All right. Since a few versions back, there's another one. There's what's called the lasso selection. And that, works like in some other software where you may have used this, basically by dragging around and then selecting something. And then, of course, you can do this thing here where you go there and there and there, that sort of selection. Works similar to what I just had with the windows, to the left or to the right. It does two different things, basically, crossing and window selection, just a little freer. All right, so that's how you select things. There's all kinds of other ways to select things. There's a bunch of extensions for that too, but that's a little too involved for now. As a starter, this is how you select things. All right, so next, groups and components. Groups and components are built into SketchUp. You see there's a panel there for components. The scale figure is a component. You can go to the 3D warehouse and get yourself more things like building items, chairs, whatever. So that's in there, but at the basis, this is the rule that I always have. Once something that you modeled is an individual item, whatever that is, a box in my case here, it needs to be at least grouped. So different ways you can select this thing, of course. You can triple click, do the window selection, whatever you want to do. And then you can right click on it and you can say make group right here. And once you do that, then you can work with it. You can make copies, have them side by side, and they will stay separate. As you most probably will find out, is if geometry is not grouped, things get sticky and pieces will stick to each other, and then it's really hard to get them apart. So my rule is always, once something is an object, make it an object. So in other words, group it. You could make it a component, and making something a component, actually I'm going to explode my group here for a second, just so that I can show you that. Once you make something a component, it gets a little bit more involved, but it has certain benefits too. So you can give it a name, you can set the axis, the base point of insertion, which is very important for things like trees or people or whatever. There's a few other properties there, also whether something can just kind of face the camera as the similar to the scale figure, that sort of stuff. So as you can see here, components are a little bit more involved. Once you have made something a component, it's very good for reuse. So in other words, if you have items, street lights or furniture pieces or something like this, that appear many times in your model, make it a component. It's more efficient. You can make a group too. Actually, they're similarly efficient these days, as long as you don't make too many changes. But in principle, make it something so that it doesn't stick to something else. All right, so that's groups and components. Keyboard shortcuts, my tip number 7. You may not have noticed, but earlier when I did the rectangle, I did not click on the rectangle tool right here. So if you click on the rectangle tool, you can start it, but there's a keyboard shortcut too, R, right here. And I can make my rectangle right here, P, push pull, there you go. Very fast. L, line, learn those. Get comfortable with keyboard shortcuts. There's a really nice getting started sheet on the SketchUp website for those, where you can use it as a bit of a cheat sheet, but they're pretty easy to learn. And then once you're in a tool, let's say the rectangle tool, if you quickly want to get out of the tool, the space bar is your shortcut. So that cancels the tool and gets you back out into selection mode. So keyboard shortcuts are great. You may also have seen when I made the group earlier, might as well do it this way, that I use the menu right here, but there's a little thing here. I always like to add a keyboard shortcut, at least to the make group tool, because it doesn't have one. Components have a keyboard shortcut, it's a G, make component. Make group does not. And on the desktop version, you can very easily do that. You go to Preferences, right there. And then you find your shortcuts, and you can assign one very easily. So if I go to Group, right here, Make Group, I could type in the shortcut and assign it. I already did that, so I don't have to do it again. But custom keyboard shortcuts are really useful. They work for extensions as well, all kinds of things. But at the very least, learn your default shortcuts and you'll be much faster. All right, so next, organizing things. There's a bunch of ways you can organize things in SketchUp. One is tags right here. By default, there's only one tag there, or untagged. Everything's untagged, basically. If I highlight something, and I look under Entity Info, I know right here which tag has been used for that. So tags in SketchUp work a little bit like layers, because they used to be layers. So in other words, an item can have one tag and cannot have multiple tags. So you can't apply tags to or multiple tags to single items, which might be a useful thing to classify things. But if you need to keep things apart, as in boxes, if I wanted to keep these boxes separate from everything else in a way that I could actually turn it on and off, that's one way to organize things. So now let me just make this a group again. Somehow that went away. And then you'll see if I select it up here, solid group, I'm going to add it to boxes. Now that group is in boxes. I can turn all of those off and on, and you can keep your model organized this way. So that's very useful. The one tip with that is that geometry itself should always be untagged. Objects should then be tagged. That's the cleanest way to organize things in SketchUp. Okay, next, materials. Whether you render or whether you just make things look good, you will at some point likely want to apply materials. And then for these materials, there's the panel over here on the right, and there's a bunch of default materials in there. You can make your own. This is actually fairly involved, so I'm just going to scratch the surface for this. But when you apply a material using this, you get this little paint bucket, and you can apply a material to a face. And you can apply material to objects. And this is where it gets a little tricky, because you got to now know whether you have objects or individual faces. Because for faces, you apply material to a single face, and for an object, you apply it to every single face that's within the object that does not have a material yet. So keep that in mind. This has a few implications later on if you want to position these textures, but or if you want to change textures for individual faces. You can always go into a group, or a component for that matter, by double-clicking it, and then you can apply a different material to a different face right here. But keep that in mind. Whether you're applying a material to an object or a face is very different. And then finally, there's this thing down here, the Instructor. And depending on where you are, whether you're on the web version, I believe it's up on top. Here on the desktop version, it might be on the bottom. You can move things around here too. Instructor is really useful for beginners because it has these little animations, has these little explainers for all of the tools. So right now I'm in the Select tool, but if I switch into the Move tool, I get my explanation right there. So now, once you become more proficient with SketchUp, you're most probably going to want to click this away. But for beginners, this is really useful and a really great help to get started. All right. So there's that. That's my 10 most important things. There's a ton more. And of course, I'll reference you to my book, Architectural Design with SketchUp. For those, I cover a lot of those. But yeah, those are my 10 most important things. I hope this was useful for you. My 10 most important tips to get started with SketchUp. And I wish you all happy SketchUpping.